It takes a lot to run a business these days, but you know this. It takes people, processes, assets, and technology. It takes an intelligent enterprise, predictive, proactive, and foreseeing. Unlocking the intelligent enterprise requires a very human factor, experience. We know the intelligent enterprise is not something you plug into overnight. It requires a foundational digital core and evolves over time to meet your business needs. This is the power of the intelligent enterprise. Connected, integrated, optimized, and delightful to use. Thanks for joining our live stream today. We encourage you to leave questions and comments below and be a part of our live discussion. And now, let's welcome our panelists.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live stream from Rizing. My name is Sherry Meyer. I'm the Corporate Communications Director here at Rizing. And today, what we want to talk about is women in the workplace, and in particular, women in the retail workplace. And the reason we've chosen this topic is because what's happened over the last couple of years has really highlighted the plight of women in the workplace, but especially in retail. McKinsey and others have confirmed that worldwide women were disproportionately affected by what happened during the pandemic. And if you're a woman and you're a mom, you know that. It's caused many women to just leave the workplace entirely. Government census data also tells us that most women work in retail, and those jobs are typically lower paid. So this compounds the problems that women are having. Couple that with challenges with childcare, normally just because of the hours that retail women typically work. And then with the pandemic causing homeschooling and a lack of childcare resources. And it's just been a really tough couple of years for women. So today I want to welcome several of our executives to this panel discussion, and you who are also participating virtually during this LinkedIn call to place your comments in the chat. And let's talk about how can we solve this problem, and is mentoring one of those ways that we can help retain women in the workplace and get them to come back into the workplace. So without further ado, let me have our panelists introduce themselves. Katie, can we start with you?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you. My name is Katie Obi, and I'm the Chief People and Transformation Officer here at Rizing.
Kim?
Thanks, Sherry. Kim MacIntosh. I am the General Manager for Attune in North America. Happy to be here today.
Thanks, Kim. How about you, Kimberly?
Hi, Sherry. Thanks for having me. I'm a consulting director and our data practice lead in Rizing Consumer Industries. I'm really excited to talk about mentoring and the experiences we've had and the success we've had with mentoring.
I know you all have a lot of passion around this topic, as do I. So how do we keep women in the workforce? How do we show them that there's a reason to stay? Is mentoring something that can help with this? I'll let you ladies take the floor.
I mean, I'll start maybe.
Great.
I feel like we're, as you said, Sherry, we're losing women in retail specifically. The demands are high. It's difficult to kind of manage the reactive nature of COVID, right? With going back to remote learning for some children, they're predominantly women still are leading our households, right? So it's a big ask for them to, kind of continue to focus on working and maybe even, the balancing the stress of the risks that they're bringing home to their family when they're frontline workers, et cetera. It's a lot, right? So we know that they're leaving rapidly, and how do we, create that environment and whatnot to mentor and bring that to a different reaction, right? I think we have to change the way that we think about this as the future, post-COVID comes back, and we can actually make a real difference at that point.
Absolutely. Kimberly? Sorry.
Yeah, so I would say as somebody who came out of industry and worked in retail for a long time, the pandemic definitely shed a light on what we're seeing the impact of on women's lives. But I would argue that it's existed for a long time. I worked for an essential retailer, and if there was a large weather event or a large sporting event, right,
Yes.
we always had to be on call, ready to be in the stores and answer the call. So I would say maybe the pandemic, as I said, shines a light on it, but it's nothing new. And there are retailers doing working with women very successfully, having flexible work schedules. There's a number, we have to think about retail, not just in the context of our corporate employees, but on our frontline store employees, and offering flexibility in their work environments for them as well, or different career pathing options for them to stay engaged with us. We know that culture and the big quit, as people are calling it, and the shortages in the labor market, people choosing to exit the labor market overall, one of the biggest reasons why people stay is culture. And that's where I think mentoring can start to play a role in creating a much more inclusive culture.
You mentioned flexible workplaces, and we talked about this offline a little bit about how difficult it is if you're working frontline retail to really have a flexible work schedule. But I will say that at least locally here, my Starbucks changed their work hours. They were not open as early, which was a disappointment to me because I feel coffee is essential. However, I'm sure they were doing it because their staffing is short, and women trying to get off to work in the morning and getting their kids to a daycare, or possibly now being a relative for daycare, is difficult. Katie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of really good components to mentoring, and there have been lots of successes that have been proven through mentoring programs. But I might have the more controversial view here, which is that I don't think that mentoring goes far enough to really making an impactful difference. So some of the things that I really want us to talk more about, just in general, is programs like allyship and sponsorship. I think those are much more impactful programs in terms of accelerating, developing women's career in the workforce. And maybe I'll just talk a little bit about, what's the difference between those and mentoring. So if we take sponsorship, for instance, so mentoring is much more kind of employee-led. It's a lot about kind of facilitating answers to questions, developing specific skills. For instance, sponsorship is different. So sponsorship is a bit more senior leader initiated. It's really a very proactive relationship between an executive and a senior leader, and normally a high potential person in the organization. It is very action-oriented advice, and it's very kind of influential over someone's career. This is a sponsor is someone who will go in and advocate for your career, advocate for high-profile projects for you to be in, advocate for stretch assignments and promotional opportunities. And that's really what makes the difference in terms of going from helping someone to develop their skills and maybe build good relationships, and all of those things are important, to changing the dynamics of an organization and helping high potential women to really kind of grow their careers and change the leadership dynamics of an organization. So for me, sponsorship is really powerful and important. I've seen that in my own careers, but I've also seen it, as an HR professional as well, and a leader in organizations, the difference that can make. And that's a really important one. And some interesting statistics there. So 51% of high potential employees have a mentor, but only 19% have a sponsor. And sponsorship is the thing that makes the difference. So I would encourage people out there and anyone who's working in a leadership role, really think about how you can provide that sponsorship. The other really interesting aspect, which is where we start to come on to allyship, is that senior leaders tend to sponsor people that remind them of themselves as well. So when you have a lot of white male leaders, they will tend to sponsor people that remind them of themselves, and it perpetuates a cycle as well. So that's where allyship comes in. And it's interesting, the research is really showing that there's a real difference between intent and action from an allyship standpoint. So allyship is about using really active and consistent actions, and being able to use our positions of privilege and power to help support and advocate for people with less privilege. It's not about one action that gets things perfectly right. It's about the small steps that add up over time, and it's about really taking that active role. So It's interesting. So again, a few statistics there. About 77% of white employees see themselves as allies to women of color. But only 11% of Black female employees feel that they're getting the allyship. So there's a difference between what people in more privileged positions or with different backgrounds think they're doing and intend to do, and the actions that they're actually taking in order to be good allies. So of that 77%, only 45% educate themselves on the experiences of women of color, 39% actively confront discrimination when they see it, and only 21% advocate for new opportunities for women of color. So this is where allyship is really important. It goes beyond that mentorship, and just simple actions like speaking up for women on your team if you see that they're being continually interrupted in meetings. That happens 3 times as often to women as it does to men. Working proactively to make things fairer. Don't make assumptions about what we think is the right thing to do. Listen to your people who have less privilege and follow their lead about what will be most impactful. And really actively recommend colleagues with a more marginalized identity for a promotion or an opportunity, a stretch assignment, getting that visibility. So those are things that I think are really important. It's not that there's no place for mentoring. There is a really strong place for mentoring, but it needs to be like a trifecta. The 3-legged stool of mentoring, allyship, and sponsorship, I think, is where the magic happens.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, Katie. And what I'm hearing, I was jotting down as you were talking, was as leaders, we need to step forward more to solve the issue of women in the workplace. Yeah. What about, taking time to do this? I mean, you're already talking about, I was a mom with little kids at one point, and mentoring was the last thing on my list. So what about, how do we help women take the time or to find a mentor or to pursue higher leadership in careers? How do we do that? How do we get them engaged?
I think it's all about culture, honestly. I mean, it's creating the environment, making it completely appropriate to have those conversations and to have them in a non-judgmental way, right? So we have to be able, and we have to be the stewards of this, right? Because as females, we've all been there. We understand what the challenges are that we face, let alone, now we have a pandemic on top of it, right? And we have a challenging situation to face as a worldwide economy, right? So I think it's really important for us to try to create that open, honest conversations and maybe even unofficially to start. And then, I'm sure, Katie and Kim, you guys have some great ideas on ways you can get started from an organization perspective. But what I would say is it's all really about the attitude and being open and honest and allowing those conversations to happen, promoting those conversations to start happening. Because until you get used to that kind of mentoring piece, it is one leg of the stool, right? As Katie said. So you really need to do that and do it well before you can, move on and start thinking about sponsorship and how do we help other women in our field and in our areas of our business.
I think Kim is absolutely spot on with culture. So, but I'd go one step further and say that creating a strong culture is about creating the time within the workday. It's about saying to somebody, you can take an hour to have a conversation with a mentor and prioritize that over whatever fire drill you happen to feel is going on, right? So we have to say, I want the next generation of women coming up to have a different experience than I did, which was I had to carve out my own time out of sometimes my own personal time to establish those relationships and can have mentoring and sponsorship relationships. I'd like to see a culture where we stand behind the words that we speak to our larger workforce and really prioritize career development and personal development. Happy, healthy, well-adjusted people who feel like they can show up as their authentic selves in a place where they are celebrated for who they are and are looking to become the best versions of themselves. Those types of environments where we prioritize self for the benefit of all, is really when we start to see the magic happen with these types of relationships. And I would also say, to Kim's point, it doesn't need to be formal. I wouldn't wait for HR to start a formal sponsorship program. It can be really scary to reach out and say to somebody you admire, like, I would love to learn from you. Do you have time to give me? And that can feel like a big ask. So a simple thing of maybe you saw the way somebody handled something in a meeting and you go, wow, I don't know that I have the skill set or knowledge to do it that way. What about setting just a quick chat or picking up the phone and saying, could you spend 10 minutes with me? I loved the way that you interacted, and I'm just not sure I know how to do that. Could you share some insights with me? So mentoring and learning from a growth perspective doesn't have to be so formal, and you can ease your way into it.
It can be scary though, right?
It can be so scary. So asking somebody for 10 minutes of that's kind of my cheater to get started. cheater tip is, instead of saying to somebody, will you commit to be my mentor or sponsor for a year, meet with me every other week? Like, that's big commitments. And you might not have the courage to do that yet. But to say to somebody, one, if you praise somebody, they're going to be excited that you're recognizing something that they did well and recognizing the skill that they have. And then to be a bit vulnerable and lean in a little bit and say, I'd love to learn how to do what you just did. Can you take 10 minutes? That's a much easier conversation to have with somebody. And if you compliment me, I'm going to help you out all day long, right? So
same.
Right? So if you do, so my trick is compliment. I'd like to learn that. Can you spare 10 minutes? And then you've opened the door to continue conversations with that person.
Yeah, it's a pro tip, not a cheater tip, by the way.
Yeah, pro tip.
Pro tip. Definitely. And, you're making a good point. Reaching out and networking, I think, are really important. But I think also outside of your workplace. Have the rest of you had experiences with that were really positive or negative? And what can you share about that?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, it always started in the workplace, right? Because you have those opportunities, as Kimberly just mentioned, right, to actually see the skills that you want to help drive. So when I was asking for mentors early in my career, for sure it started in the workplace, but it has continued on. I have people that I still consider my personal advisors, right, that were a mentor to me 25 years ago. In my career, and I still will reach out to them and, have a conversation about, hey, this is what's going on. And, just checking in, and it's good to have those people that will give you that honest feedback and that will be there for you, right? To be just listen and advise and whatever. But I think it does start that way. But I also think that, retail being such a small environment, it would be very easy to start to build that outside of your current role and your current company, right? And I think networking is huge to that. I'm sure so many activities for retail right now. It's really just about getting started, and once you get started, I think then you can kind of build that environment of people around you that can help in different areas from a mentoring perspective. And yeah. Katie, I'm sure you have some opinions about that, right?
Gosh, know me so well. No, I completely agree with everything that you said, and I think mentoring has a kind of fluidity and a flexibility to it, and that's a really good thing, because you might have mentors for particular areas you're within work, but then you also have the opportunity for more and more mentorship outside of work, and that can be anything from former colleagues that you worked with that have a skill in a particular area, looking at other companies and people who are doing similar roles to you and developing like a peer-to-peer kind of relationship. And then there are professional networking groups as well. So there are so many opportunities to find mentors, and that mentoring relationship could be anything from a formal mentoring arrangement that has been put in place to really, you know, as Kimberly was saying, that kind of 5-10 minutes, can I learn from you for a little bit? And I think having lots of different mentors for different things, and, you know, formal and informal arrangements can be really powerful. There was a company that put in place a flash mentoring program, which I thought was really interesting. And that's a database that they created, which is searchable by all employees. And it talks about all the small skills that people have. And someone can search it and find out, you know, who's really good at this thing that I really want to learn how to do. And the mentoring that is given is no more than 2 hours. So if the mentor, you know, who gets matched says, actually, no, I think I can help the person, they can set up a coffee chat, or they can spend 2 hours with that individual, or do a meeting where they take them through the specific thing that they want to develop. And that's it. You know, that's the end of that kind of mentoring relationship. And they both go on and go about their daily tasks, but the mentee has got something from it, and the mentor has got something from it, and relationships are built through that. And that's another alternative that companies can think about, in terms of not just lengthy, you know, year plus, once a week you sit down and you meet with your mentor type programs, but other more flexible ways, and things like reverse mentoring as well. So having younger employees mentoring older employees. You know, what is the future of the workforce looking like? What are our customers of the future looking for in a company? And having mentoring as being a two-way relationship is really interesting. So we often tend to think of mentoring as we look up to be able to find our mentor of choice, but it's not. It's look all around you. There are people who are inspirational, who have skills that you haven't developed yet everywhere, and there are so many opportunities for building relationships and for learning new things from each other.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very refreshing to not always hear everybody in your own work area, and that teamwork, that collaboration is really very beneficial. How do we get somebody to move from mentorship, though, to an allyship or a sponsorship? How do you finesse that?
It's difficult, because if it was easy, we'd be doing it already, and there wouldn't be that disconnect between we think we're doing it, but we're not actually doing it. So I think some of it is through training and education about what does allyship look like, and specifically sponsorship as well. What does sponsorship look like? How do you initiate being a sponsor? How do you act like a good ally? What are the things that you should keep in mind and do? Allyship builds allyship. So the more people start being, you know, active and consistent allies, the more people spot that it's happening, and they do it themselves, and they have the courage and the confidence to do it. And that's how you get kind of cultural change over time. Sponsorship is, I think, different. You know, sponsorship is everyone should be an ally. Not everyone is a sponsor because they're not in a position where they can influence someone's career. So
Right.
Sponsorship, it, you know, really is work with the senior leadership or executive team about, you know, think about who you're sponsoring. Think about how you can influence people's careers. Think about people who have done that for you in the past, and that the difference that it made, and pay it forward, you know, to the next generation coming through. So I think there's a lot of education from that standpoint, and there's also a lot where people also have to educate themselves as well. It's not just about a formal HR program that trains people on how to do it. It's about really wanting to learn, and wanting to be a better sponsor, and wanting to be a better ally, and listening to people and understanding what that means in your particular organization and for employees that you're working with.
Agree.
I would add to that, because I guess the first thing I would say is I was one of the founding members of our Women's Employee Resource Group. I think I'm very mindful about women's experience. But last year, I had somebody who really I don't know how they mustered up enough courage to have a really frank and honest conversation with me that my experience isn't their experience. And so I'm going to say awareness is a big thing. And this goes back to Katie's statistics about intent and action, two very different things. So to me, awareness, personal awareness and social awareness of what's happening around you. And then having the courage to step in, like Katie gave those tips, when you hear people talking over one another. Or my big pet peeve is, if you're in the room, you deserve to be there. Why are you selecting a seat along the wall? It is my largest pet peeve ever. And by the way, if you're in the room, you deserve to be at the table, and at the table, you deserve to talk. You're there for a reason, and you should.
Or the virtual Zoom panel.
Yes. And so, and virtual, it's even a little trickier. You have to be, virtual can sometimes be a tough place for introverted personalities to really shine. So I encourage people to make sure that we're really using our chat features, that we're really, if we see somebody being silent, use techniques, good facilitation techniques in conversations as well, to say, Sherry, I'd like to go, love to hear what you have to say, but Kim, I'd like to come to you next. That allows introverts to hear, to think and hear what others are saying, and know they're going to be called on, versus being put on the spot. So to me, there are things that we can do from an awareness perspective that seem small, but really start to build up our allyship skills. So for me, I had a big aha moment last year. And that is really important for us to consider. Our experience isn't everybody's experience.
And none of us is perfect, and we have a lot to learn from each other. I mean, honestly, I mentor not because I feel I have so much to lend to someone else, but really to connect with others in the organization and hear their points of view and what their struggles are, and, be more aware, as you said, about what are other people's experiences, because they're not mine at all.
No. And that goes to that reverse mentorship. You might not think that when you sign up to be a mentor that you're going to turn into a mentee, but in all the mentors I speak with, we often gain a lot more from being a mentor than we feel that we give our mentees. So if you're interested, like Sherry said, in learning more about what's happening in the workplace and keeping a pulse on things, being a mentor is a really great way to do that.
So how do we get our businesses to change? How do we all have the right ideas here? How is retail moving the needle forward with this? How can they move the needle forward with this?
Well, sponsorship is real. In my own experience, sponsorship is really missing in retail. Lots of women's resource groups. We have professional associations dedicated to women in retail and CPG companies, like the Network of Executive Women, and they do great programs from personal and professional development. But what we're lacking is true sponsorship. So if we have HR folks on the line or senior leaders, I would love to see more formalized education around sponsorship, and maybe even commit to launching a pilot program this year, or commit to sponsoring somebody that is a high performing individual, and bringing them along on their journey, really reaching back and giving a hand. I think Katie's got just a huge amount of information and data that says sponsorship is the way. We get stuck as women at the manager level, entry level management positions, and our statistics are pretty equal to our male counterparts up until that point. But once you get above that is where we see it significantly reduce. And we just know that diverse workforces are good business. Divergent ideas and having multiple people at the table with multiple experiences is good ideas. I don't know why you wouldn't want to do it. So
we know that, but you're making an important point there, Kimberly, because I think, especially right now where we are in the economy and with recruiting, there is definitely a business case to be made at the highest levels for mentoring, allyship, and sponsorship, because the cost of losing good valued people, or having to reduce your shop hours, as many have had to do in retail because you can't get the workers on the floor, or not being able to answer the supply chain issues, is huge, right?
It's almost overwhelming and feels insurmountable when I talk to clients and colleagues and friends who still work in retail. So to me, it's about we talked a little bit about flexibility, right? So flexibility comes by you have a frontline worker who's not able to come in because they're sick, or they've had a COVID exposure, or they have a child who's now has to do schooling from home. If you cross-train your other employees, you have the ability to flex within your existing resources, right? So that's one way to offer flexibility. And oh, by the way, the more jobs you do, the more well-rounded you are, the better you understand your business, and the more you have an opportunity to advance in your career. To me, it's a really important thing that we don't forget to create flexibility and opportunities for education in the workplace.
We're showing a comment from Dr. Jessica Helston on the screen right now, and it's something that we did talk about offline, the broken rung. And I wonder if, Katie, I know you had could you talk about that a little bit more? Because I think that is I'm so glad she brought it up, because it's a really important issue.
Yes, thank you so much. Great comment, and completely agree with it. So the broken rung really is, so entry level into the workplace is pretty equal between genders right now. But it shows that once you move into that kind of entry level managerial position, this is where everything starts to go wrong for women. So 62% of entry level managerial positions are held by men, which means 38 held by women. I don't think the research that was done defined genders more broadly than male and female in that case. But that means that there's a much bigger managerial pipeline for men than there are for women, starting at those entry-level management positions. And that means that there are fewer women who are able to be considered for the next levels, and it ramps up from there. But it's really important that organizations look at addressing how do we make sure, if there's equal numbers of men and women coming into the organization at an entry-level standpoint and in individual contributor positions, why we can't make sure that that's the case as we look at the promotion into managers. So for every 100 men hired to become a manager, I think only 72 women were. And actually, that's much worse if we look at ethnic diversity as well. So of those 100, only 57 Latinos and only 64 Black women were promoted into those managerial positions. That is, as our participant also highlighted, that is when it needs to be addressed in order to build the pipeline. It's really interesting that McKinsey and Lean In actually said that if we can address that, we will add 1 million more women into management in corporate America over the next 5 years if we address just that first step. So it's a really important one for organizations to think about, how they can set more goals for moving women into first line management, how there can be more requirement around diverse pipelines and slates for hiring and promotion, how you can train people on unconscious bias so that they're making good decisions through the hiring and the promotion process, how you can set clear evaluation criteria so that you're evaluating without bias in your decisions about who to promote, and how you can also prepare women better to be able to step up into those positions. So those are 5 actionable areas that McKinsey identified that organizations can work on in order to help to address that.
And I want to say that was a lot of information. We are going to share those resources to the attendees here following this. We'll send out all the stats and all the articles and the great research all of you mentioned, because it is really important. And Katie, you mentioned something else in your talk that I jotted down. It was so many good things, but the gender issue right now, we're talking about women and we're talking about men versus women, but there certainly continues to be an expansion of that topic beyond just the binary relationships. And so, being able to step out of our traditional ways of promoting and thinking about how people work through management track or what their personal lives and personal experiences are and what they bring to the workplace is really important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'd also like to say that there are lots of resources to help employers with some of these topics. So Lean In, I think, is an excellent resource. They offer free programs, which include everything from the emails that you send out right through to the moderator guides and the training materials for allyship. They provide Circle, 2 years worth of Circles components as well to use in resource groups and circles within organizations. So there's a lot of material that's available free of charge or very cost effectively for organizations to use. It is a bit North America centric. But if you're based in North America, then really, really interesting materials to be able to leverage to help you get a head start on your journey. Because sometimes the hardest thing is just starting, and then it's easier to put one step in front of another and move forward. And just remember, not everything needs to be perfect. Just small actions that add up over time make a difference.
Yeah, I love that. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just start put one foot in front of the other. Kim, you've been quiet for a little while, so I want to turn the floor over to you and talk with you about some of the stuff that we talked about offline in terms of, personal board of directors, valuing honest feedback. We talked about so many great things that businesses need to embrace.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole discussion that Kimberly and Katie brought up around the three-legged stool and having all of these people, that is your personal board of directors, right? So that is something, and I think even in one of the comments I saw, your tribe got you through, right? Your personal tribe that can give you that honest feedback. It is up to us as women to help those in our profession and outside of our profession, even in our personal relationships, to promote this theory, right? I think women in general, just because of the way that historically it's been, right? We don't have those same opportunities, and we feel uncomfortable asking for those things, asking for help, asking for what we need, right, to make ourselves successful. And the first key to kind of creating a difference, I think, is to empower women to have that voice and make it so comfortable that they feel like they can ask for a sponsor. They feel like they can ask for an ally. They can create their personal board of directors, right? That are not necessarily people within their own organization that will help them in their careers. It's not an easy task. We haven't solved it yet, right? So, but I think Katie's point previously was a valid one. We have to take steps, however small, to get started on the journey here. It's going to be a difficult task for us to move this through, but we have to. And we've seen in this pandemic, with the Great Resignation, right, that we are losing, valuable insight with women that are leaving the workforce in droves, right? So because they have other responsibilities and are quite, underperformed in as far as salary expectations and whatnot, and quite often are not the main income earners, right? So they have to make those sacrifices. It's a difficult conversation, but we have got to find ways as corporations and as businesses, especially here in the US, I find, we're a little bit further behind other countries, right? From that offering daycare and
yes,
all
giving
of those
enough
kinds
time
of
off after birth, yes,
or even just on-site daycare, and understanding that that men can be the main caregivers in the household, right? It does not have to always fall to the traditional sense of family that we knew from 70 years ago, right? So it is definitely a change that we need to make, right? We need to think about how do we enable people to actually be able to go to work and make choices that promote their career without sacrificing what they want on their personal lives, right? So, which I think women are great at sacrificing. We do it a lot, right?
The pressure sometimes becomes so much, from what I'm hearing lately, especially over the last 2 years, that it's just not, women don't feel, even with a paycheck, don't feel the value of coming back to the workforce or staying. And I think that's probably true for some men right now too, but there's a comment we've just posted now from Lisa Niles. Does the movement away from the broken rung require a societal shift in seeing women as the primary caregivers? I think it does. I think we're a ways away from that, but I think it does. I think a lot of this is the way socially we've come to this place, right? And we talked about too offline about, decisions used to be made on the golf course between the men who had time to go out and golf, right?
Yeah, I would say though, to see that shift, we as women have to be allies to our male coworkers. So when we hear men taking paternity leave, when we hear men stepping into some more of those caregiver roles, we need to applaud them, and we need to be flexible with them the way
and
we're
be supportive. Be supportive.
The way we're asking them to be supportive of us as well.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it goes both ways. And I think we've seen a slow shift into a more equally balanced household from a caregiver perspective, but we are still a long way away. And the women still carry a bulk of that burden. So, there have been some companies through ASUG's Women Connect that I've met with female leaders who are doing some very interesting things from a remote work perspective, which is setting up their day like the school day, and having planned breaks, if you span many time zones and so forth, this obviously gets more complicated. But if you are all in the same time zone, really setting up, we've seen companies successfully set up working hours that mimic the school day. So, if recess, and I don't know what recess is, but say it's 10 o'clock in the morning, taking blocking off no meetings from 10 to 10:30, or everybody takes lunch around 12 o'clock, right? So that automatically creates inherent flexibility in the workday. And so while we may not be able to do that, a company like Rizing, we're a global company, we may not be able to do that. Katie can attest to that probably better than most of us. She's up at all hours of the day and night. But imagine what would happen is if you were assigned to a project or you were working in a specific time zone, we should set maybe office hours, and we should respect those office hours. So if I see Katie's office hours are from, in my time zone from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m., I should be booking a meeting with Katie during where our office hours overlap. And we should make that commonplace, right?
To the extent that that's possible, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So those exceptions, like waking up at midnight, it should be an exception, not the rule, when you work across time zones. And that's more of an issue now that we're all working remote, right? So to me, there's ways to take what these great female entrepreneurs are doing to add flexibility and awareness and build their days. We can take that on. It may look a little different, but at the end of the day, it's respecting boundaries, setting up boundaries, saying it's okay to step away from your desk, not expecting people to answer emails in 30 seconds because our offices are now our homes, right? So maybe reestablishing some boundaries is something that you can consider to help encourage women to come back into the workforce.
And be a good example, because I would say a lot of the things that you said resonate with me because I've experienced that here at Rizing. I've seen men taking childcare leaves, paternity leaves, and the whole team pitching in to help that person while they're out. But also, one of the greatest examples for me here has been just knowing that I'm trying to get a hold of somebody and they're like, okay, I'm on the soccer field with my child right now, or I'm homeschooling right now and I'll get back to you in an hour. And I'm fine with that, and I applaud that. And it also, so as a leader, if you can do those sort of things, it gives your team permission also to do those sort of things.
The example is being the example.
And I think it's really interesting. Burnout is going to be such a big discussion over the coming months and years, especially as we start to see COVID cases start to surge in a number of geographies as well. And, some schools are shutting again. It feels like Groundhog Day. Hopefully this, we can start to move on at some point, but we've been saying that for years now. And I think what we'll find is that that burnout is really, really a thing. People have had to step up. The workforce is completely different than it was. Retail companies have had to completely change, how they operate in this kind of market. And now we have the labor market that's so different in terms of being able to attract and retain talent too, not to mention what's happening outside of the workplace as well, as we've talked about on this call. So we cannot underestimate burnout. And I think putting in place the right kind of structures to make things manageable, I think, is a really important step for people to be taking as we look towards, people say, the new normal, but whatever that looks like, all of those boundaries have evaporated over the past few years. People have worked from home, or people have not been able to get access to childcare, or people have been having to work more and more. They haven't been able to go out and do the other things that they had in their lives, because it all got cancelled, and everyone is on Zoom and has their video camera on, 16 hours a day, and it's too much, and it needs to calm down. And we need to work out, what are the right boundaries to put in place, what works for the organization, what works for the individuals, and we need to respect that. We're starting to see it come into legislation a bit more. A number of countries have either introduced or are talking about introducing a right to disconnect legislation around not actually expecting any kind of response around, from a text or a work email at certain hours, to give people the ability to be able to disconnect. Take your leave. Everyone on this call, take your annual leave. It's there for you. You need to have it to recharge, and don't work while you're on it too. So that's the other thing.
Absolutely.
Especially in the US. Is everyone begrudgingly takes their leave and then works the entire time they're on it, and it doesn't help you be productive. It doesn't help you be creative and innovative. All of those skills that you need to be successful in this kind of environment require you to have enough rest. So putting in place the things that you need in order to recharge and get that is really important to your careers. And if you're a manager, a leader, or an HR professional, making sure that you help to facilitate that for your employees is really, really important.
So I'm hearing other people's meeting notices go off for the top of the hour, so I want to be mindful of the amount of time that we're on this call. But I love this conversation, and I hope that we can continue it at some point in the future. We will be sending out, the resources that we've looked at, and we welcome other people to respond to the emails that we'll send out with other information or other conversations you'd like to have like this. We'd love to continue it. To kind of wrap up this whole conversation, how do we move forward? How do we move up? How do we get businesses to change, especially retail? Because I'm feeling a lot of pain for all the essential retail female workers I've run into in the last 2 years. But if you're interested, go ahead, Kim.
I would say first and foremost is gratitude. We have to be appreciative, which I think we were at the beginning of the pandemic, but arguably, I think everybody has a little bit of pandemic fatigue, and some of us have found alternate ways of shopping, et cetera. But many of us still need to go into our workplaces to do our jobs. And so for those people and those frontline retail workers, I want to say thank you. That's the first piece.
Ditto.
Right? Because I think as we move forward, leading with empathy and kindness, having awareness, being an ally, everything we've talked about today does not require large corporately funded programs. They require small, consistent steps by each of us to make the culture, our work environment, better for us collectively. So if you feel like you're part of your culture, you can take action today. And like Sherry said, we'll put some tips and tricks and some data and facts. But then if you don't have a women's resource group, start one. It could be as simple as doing like a coffee talk and throwing it out to some people and just organically having it grow. Like Katie talked about, the circles, mentoring circles. That's how we started mentoring here at Rizing, and they're very informal. They allow for 360 mentoring. You throw out a topic and you have a facilitated conversation once a month. You're building your network, you're getting to know each other. So the how for, I guess, leaders and HR professionals is maybe loosen the reins a little bit. Be accepting of what your workforce is bringing forward and what they want to do. Let your workforce take the lead. And when you see something has teeth and you can start to formalize some of those programs, then start to do that and be an ally through action.
What would your top takeaway for our listeners be, Kim?
I think you just need to start a conversation, right? And whether it's starting a conversation with somebody that you want to mentor, whether you see somebody within, your own organization or even, outside your organization that you feel like you could offer some support to. I mean, I think what Kimberly hit on was huge. Empathy and making those employees feel valuable, and trying to at least start a conversation. Very small steps lead to bigger things, right? I think we have to start to create the environment, and the only way that we're going to do it is by talking about it. So more conversations like this, more conversations with one-on-ones with our employees, with our personal connections, and people within our network.
Katie, what do you want to leave our friends with?
So two things. So one for managers and leaders, which is think about what legacy you want to leave behind, and then let that guide the things that you work on. And then for everyone, it's not always possible to do everything. So just set yourself a goal that is, you will spend 5 minutes each day doing something that's important but not urgent. And those 5 minutes add up, and that helps you move forward. So whether that's reaching out to a mentor, whether that's connecting with someone you haven't spoken with for a while, whether it's doing a 5-minute rapid exercise, whatever it is for you, just block out some time, and that could just be 5 minutes if that's all you have time for, and use that to do something that's important and not someone else's priority or something that is urgent.
Yeah, thank you. So if you're interested in this topic, if you're on this call, do something. Start small if you're a business. It doesn't have to be anything formal, but let your people know in your organization know that taking time out to mentor, to connect with each other, to form allyships, form sponsorships is really valuable to your entire organization. That's going to flow down to the people that you're recruiting eventually, and going to make a big change in your culture. So thank you to all of our panelists for joining today. I truly did enjoy this conversation, and I hope we'll have more of them.